All right. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you all. Good to have our youth group kiddos with us today, too. Excited for us to be able to continue our series today. So I want to start by asking, for those who were here last week, did anybody have a chance to practice a spiritual conversation with a friend or a spouse? I know some of you in the room weren't here last week, so you have no clue on earth what I'm talking about. But anybody in the room have a chance to give it a shot? Okay. Oh, Ashley?
Well, I didn't. I had a real spiritual conversation.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I haven't practiced one, but this class was very helpful.
Cool. Yeah. So it was like this wasn't training. This was like the real thing.
There was somebody at the hair salon.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Wonderful. Yeah. Well, I hope it went well.
It did.
Good. Okay. Well, just as a reminder, the last couple of weeks we've talked about trying to add some skills to be able to tell the story of Jesus, to be able to work on our evangelistic opportunities here a little bit. And so the last couple of weeks we've talked about primarily two different skills. The first one is that we want to enter into every opportunity prayerfully and prepared for that encounter. And so that means that we have to do work on ourselves first and foremost. And so we talked a little bit about spending some time in prayer, trying to reconvert ourselves before we have any opportunity to talk to somebody else. We want to make sure that we ourselves are feeling ready, excited, and that when we share something about Jesus, it's not out of, let me just tell you about this guy that I like named Jesus. But that we're excited about it, that it's something that is actually life-giving to us and that we want to share life with somebody else. And then the second thing that we talked about was this idea of spiritual conversations. And so kind of the first step of that is to discover, to identify persons of peace. And the way that we do that is we encounter people in our own lives. Maybe it's somebody at the hair salon, maybe it's a coworker, and we start by kind of looking for clues. What are the things that they are interested in talking about, and how can we relate those things back to something that's not necessarily even Christian, but something that's spiritual? So if they talk about something that brings them joy, well, that could be an entry point into a spiritual conversation. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a specifically Christian conversation, but that might be a clue that, okay, I can start to maybe take some baby steps towards those conversations about Christ. But at the same time, we also want to honor objections. And so anytime we encounter somebody who's not prepared, or if they seem to be putting up a roadblock in that conversation, we don't want to just force our way into having that conversation with somebody who's not interested. We want to look for a person of peace, somebody who will welcome us into that conversation. And so we want to look for clues and honor objections. And then last week we talked about this idea of spiritual conversations and kind of preparing ourselves and brainstorming how we can enter into those conversations. So we thought about maybe there's a handful of things that will come up in any conversation that you find yourself with somebody. Conversations about the weather. Okay, well, how do I transition from a conversation about the weather into a conversation about spirituality and Christianity and the person of Jesus, right? And so this is all kind of preparation work, things that we have to do on the front end, things that we have to do to prepare ourselves in order to have these conversations, to be ready so that when somebody starts talking about something that's going on, a community event, you're ready to transition that into a conversation about Jesus potentially. Okay, there was a couple of really good comments made last week. Anybody want to share anything else about any of these conversations before we dive into this week's topic? It's early in the morning. We're still waking up trying to remember, what did we talk about last week? I get it. I understand. Okay, well, today I want to transition and talk, let's pretend, let's imagine like we have done all of those things. We have spent some time in prayer, preparing ourselves. We've spent some time identifying persons of peace. We've had spiritual conversations with people, and we feel like, okay, there's somebody here who's ready to move beyond just a generic spiritual conversation into a more specifically Christian conversation. And so, of course, what do we as Church of Christers think is one of the most important things that we can do when it comes to talking about spirituality? We think reading the Bible is one of the most important things, I think. Is that fair to say? That's on the top of the list somewhere. Top 2, top 1, top 4, I don't know, but it's up there. And so let's imagine that we have done those first 3 steps, And now we want to enter into a Bible study with somebody. So I want to share with you, some of you may already know about Discovery Bible Study, but that's what I want to share with you today about is this format of Bible study called Discovery Bible Study. It's particularly great for encounters with people who don't have any background, who don't have any knowledge, because it really takes the focus off of having an expert in the room. And it puts the focus into the story that you're going to be reading that day. And so I really like Discovery Bible Study for that purpose because it kind of levels the playing field. You don't have to have somebody who has studied the Bible for 50 years in the room in order to do this kind of Bible study. You don't have to have somebody who's even read this story before a single time, and you can still enter into this type of Bible study. And so it's really great for people who might be brand new to these ideas of stories in Scripture. So kind of some of the just logistics about it, it's really best done in groups of 3 to 8. Because it allows for conversation around the room. You know, if you get into a group this size, like this morning, for instance, I might hear comments from 4 or 5 of you, but I'm probably not going to hear comments from everybody in the room today. And so it's really great done in smaller group settings. That way you can have more specific conversation and allow for everybody in the room to have an opportunity to share and be a part of it. So groups of 3 to 8, and what's really great about if you find yourself in a group of larger than 8, you just break into 2 different studies, and you've just kind of doubled your evangelistic efforts. And so that's kind of a neat thing too, is you just kind of keep multiplying and growing that way. Like I said, it doesn't require an expert. It keeps the focus on the text that you're going to be reading, the story that you're going to be reading. And so you really kind of, at the beginning, you kind of lay out and you say, I know, we might not all be familiar with this, but we're going to try to base our comments off of what is found in this story. And so if you have an insight, if you have an observation, it's not based on your feelings, it's not based on your prior knowledge, it's based on what do you see in the text, which I think is another really great aspect to this. It kind of puts the focus on Scripture. And then another great thing about it is that it develops community. Right at the start, like I said, if you have a group of 3 to 8, you're kind of developing this small group of people who are all participating together. They're all in this journey together. So it develops community right from the start, and people start to feel a connection with each other because you're sharing. You're sharing observations, insights, experiences, and stories, understanding, and you're doing it all together. It teaches discipleship because from the very beginning, it asks questions like, how are you going to put this into practice in your life? And so somebody who's not even a Christian, somebody who's never even heard this story from Scripture before, the study is going to ask you to ask the question, how are you going to apply this? What are you going to do with this knowledge, with this information? And so right from the start, it starts to teach discipleship to somebody who's not even a believer potentially. And it also asks at the very end, who do you need to tell? Who do you need to tell this story to? And so it also teaches evangelism from the very beginning, which is a great, for our purposes, especially today, it's a really great thing because now it's not just Randall who's trying to do evangelism. Now it's his entire group of Discovery Bible Study who's, oh, we read this story. I got to tell my sister-in-law about this, or I got to tell. Well, that's probably not a good example. She's in the room. But you know what I mean. You got to tell somebody about this because hey, we read. I was a part of this random thing, and we read this story, and I learned this because of it. And you go and tell somebody that. So I think it's a really great thing. Has anybody in the room ever heard of or practiced Discovery Bible Study before? Okay, so pretty brand new for most of us. Okay, I want to walk through just kind of, there's really kind of 7 main components, stages to the study. And so I want to walk through those real quick, and then just so that you can kind of mentally be preparing yourself, I'm going to have us break up into groups this morning and practice. And I left plenty of time this week. So I know last week we ran out of time before we got to do the practicing. I left plenty of time this week, don't worry. And so we're going to have a chance to actually practice this together. Okay, so let's go to that next slide. So these are the main components to this study. This is kind of what you do, and there's questions that you can follow under each part. So the first part is you're going to talk. You're just going to start to share stories. You're going to share a little bit about your life. How's your week been? What's been going on? What are you struggling with? What's something that you can celebrate this week? You're just going to talk. Then you're going to look back. This applies to the second week and beyond, because you're going to look back at the prior week's study. Who did you tell about this story? How did it go when you put this into practice? You said you were going to do this. How did it go? Did you succeed in doing that? Then you're going to look at the new story. You're going to read the new story, and you're going to have somebody retell it. So somebody in the room is going to read the story, and then immediately after they read it, somebody else in the group is going to retell it based on memory. And so again, what we talked about a little bit about last week about committing these stories to memory, it kind of starts practicing that from the very beginning. So somebody else gets to retell it, and if there's stuff that's left out that's important, the rest of the group can kind of chime in and fill in the blanks on that. Then you're going to look intently at that story, and you're going to ask some specific questions. You're going to ask questions about how this, what do you learn about God because of this story? And so you're going to have a kind of a conversation on what do we learn about God because of this? And then you're going to look again at the story, and you're going to say, okay, what do we learn about ourselves because of this story? What do we learn about human beings because of this? And then we get to those last two that I kind of already mentioned. We're going to examine ourselves. Okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to change in order to put this into practice? You're going to examine yourself a little bit. And then the last step is who else? Who am I going to tell? Who needs to know about this particular story? So this is kind of the format that it takes. It's not too complicated, I think. It kind of follows that. So Reb, if you want to click to the next one. So here's some of the types of questions that you can ask. And by the way, I'm going to put a website up here when we finish going through this that has all of this information in it. So, if you're not a note taker and you're like, what was that second thing he said? I'll give you the website and you can go see exactly what it says. So these are some of the types of questions that you're going to ask. So you're starting out the group. It's kind of the icebreaker moment. Let's talk. Let's catch up. Let's figure out how we're doing. What are you thankful for? What's causing you stress? Is there anybody that we know that needs our help? Is there somebody that lives in my apartment building that is having a baby that we need to make sure that they have diapers, or those kinds of things? What can we do to help somebody? So let's talk and then look back. Again, this is not the first meeting because you won't have anything to look back at the first meeting, but the second meeting, you can look back at the first meeting. Have somebody try to retell the story that you did last time. What did you do differently in your life because of this story? Who did you tell and what was their reaction? And so again, that's kind of that community moment. Let's share together, let's practice together, let's build some relationships together. And then after look back, read and retell. One person reads, a second person retells, and then others fill in whatever is missing. Look and look again, read the passage, discuss what this passage has to say about God or Jesus or God's plan. Read the passage again and discuss what this passage says about humans. So if you notice, you end up hearing this story like 3 times. And so hopefully it's kind of that opportunity for that person who's brand new to this story, or maybe they're not brand new, but I'm not sure if I'm really interested in Christianity. You're giving them the story 3 times in every study. So hopefully it's kind of give them a chance to sink in. Examine what am I already doing well and what do I need to change in my life because of this? And then the last one, who else needs to hear this story? How can I tell them? Can I invite them to study the Bible with me? Can I duplicate this group and do a second group? Right? How can we encourage people to, right from the very beginning, practice evangelism a little bit? Okay, does that make sense? Questions, comments, observations? Okay, the next slide should be the website. So discoverybiblestudyguide.org, dbsguide.org should get you there, or if you just Google Discovery Bible Study, there'll be a whole bunch of results that come up and you'll be able to find something. But you'll be able to find all those questions, all that information there if you want to. Okay, I ran through that really quickly. So before we get into the practice time, does anybody have any comments? Does anybody have any questions? What do you guys think about Discovery Bible Study? What do you think? Pros and cons.
Okay. So maybe it doesn't have to be so difficult either.
Right.
I can tell you that if I'm on the phone with someone from Verizon or the electric company or whatever, you say, hey, how are you doing today? Father just made a beautiful day today, didn't he? And a lot of times they'll just say, yeah. And that's our moment that we get to kind of know each other. So it doesn't have to be in person. You can spread Father and Jesus' love without even sitting in person.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be hard. I will tell you not one time, and I went to my father every phone call, and not one person said no. And I think it's the approach.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing?
Yeah.
If I tell you that versus let me tell you something.
That's right.
I'm not there to tell you something. I'm just there to spread what Father's love is.
Yeah.
I'm not there to preach to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't have to. I look at the early Christians, they didn't have a Bible. You know what they did? They told stories of his love.
Yeah.
don't have to be so hardcore, when we're talking about the weather. Oh my goodness. If I would turn on that heat today, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be hardcore.
Yeah.
And you get more with honey.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is for those who were here when we talked about spiritual conversations. This is exactly the kind of thing that we want to do. We want to learn how to sprinkle in these spiritual conversations into everyday life, right? And it doesn't have to be complicated. And we should take that position of encourager rather than preacher, right? How are you doing today? And so we take that. The way I talked about this last week was we take the lower position. Right? We elevate the other person and say, I'm not the expert. I'm not the one who's got to tell you how to live your life. Instead, we say, hey, I'm just a fellow journeyer on this journey called life, and I want to encourage you, and I want to share with you. And so, yeah, I think that is really important.
You should be the child. You're a child with them. Everyone's the child.
Yeah, that's right.
Why not? If you think about kids playing on the playground, how do they get a conversation going?
Yeah.
They don't do it by bullying.
Yeah.
They're not come play in the sandbox with you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
This can be done in a very gentle, wonderful way that really brings folks in.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it should be our everyday routine. It should just become nature with us. Not, it's too bad it's not.
Yeah. So this, that's right. So this is great. We should remind ourselves of this every week. This is not going to be second conversation with most people, right? This is going to be, I'm several spiritual conversations in. I haven't received any objections yet. They seem to be interested in having these types of conversations. And now I'm ready to go a little bit further, a little bit deeper into this conversation. I'm ready to move this from into a more relational specific evangelistic opportunity rather than what we should do with everybody that we encounter. This is kind of more intentional. Does that make sense? And so once you've kind of accomplished those several steps, and if there's somebody that you've encountered that you think is ready to move in this direction, this is a tool. It's not the only tool. It's a tool that can help you open up Scripture to them and begin to study together and to begin to understand and learn a little bit about Scripture. One of the other things that they do in this Discovery Bible Study is that they recommend specific texts. So you're not, you as the organizer are not choosing every week, what are we going to read today? They have, I think the initial study is 28 studies, passages of Scripture. They start in Genesis. They cover a lot of ground in Genesis, and then they kind of sprinkle in a few other Old Testament texts, and then they get into the Gospels. So roughly the first half is going to be Old Testament, second half is going to be New Testament, and kind of get into Jesus, because they want to focus on that question that was a few slides earlier of, what does this teach you about God, about Jesus, and about God's plan for the world? That's what they want to focus on with this particular study. So now you could do this with any passage of Scripture that you chose. You could sit down and say, hey, I think this would be a worthwhile passage based on the conversation that I've had with this person previously. Let's spend some time with this passage. But they actually recommend 28 passages, kind of going sequentially in order to kind of understand the flow of Scripture and what is sin, what is God's redemptive plan, who is Jesus, all those kinds of questions. So, okay, good. Anybody else? Other comments, insights, questions?
With the start of school, we're going to talk about lesson plan format next week. That's all this is.
Yeah.
This is just a step by step. But the important thing in this whole piece is the technical side of it. Some people shun the corporate side of Christianity. We have a tendency to run to that pretty hard. The storytelling is probably more effective than anything.
Yeah.
Works well in the classroom too.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to learn quadratic equations. We show them how they really work in the world. There's a purpose to it.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the great things, how are you going to apply this? Does this matter to you? Because every week you get that feedback right away. Okay, this does matter to them because they're going to put this into practice in this way. Or no, it doesn't matter to them. They didn't see any correlation between this story and their life. And so, and I think a lot of times that's part of our issue, is we're telling people a story that they think doesn't matter to their life. And so that means that we've got to do a better job of learning how to tell the story. Yeah, great. Okay, are we ready to dive in? Here's what I'm going to recommend is, let's see. I'm trying to estimate how many people are in the room. I'm going to guess 30. So let's do roughly groups of 5, 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that range. And I'll give you a passage. So find some people that you're familiar with, or find some people that you don't know in the class. That might be a good way to do this, to practice, because it might be people that you don't know very well that you're trying to do this with. So break up into small groups, and I'll come around and tell you which passage I'm going to assign to you. Feel free to move chairs, circle up. If you need to move into corners of the room or something, feel free. And I'll come tell you which passage to do. And then we'll come back and we're going to share together how our groups went at the end. right, about 30 more seconds. Try to wrap up whatever comments you're making right now, and we'll come back together as a big group. Experts. Experts. We know all about creation. That's right. All right. See if I can bring us back together as a large group. Try to wrap up whatever comment you're making right now. All right. Yeah, did you guys, how many baptisms did you guys have? I'm coming, there you go, yeah, I love it. All right. Hey, thank you guys for taking the time to do that. I know it was kind of rushed. We only had 10 minutes, but imagine that you had this kind of format with somebody for maybe 30 minutes or an hour. And I think it would be a really good format to enter into Scripture with somebody, an opportunity for everybody to kind of share together and learn. Like I said again at the beginning, since you have a small group, you have a lot of chance for a lot of people to have opportunity to comment, share together about what they're understanding from the story and what they're learning. And it doesn't take a commitment to do this. It doesn't take somebody who says, okay, I'll get baptized. It just takes somebody who's interested in learning about something that might help their lives, right? So, okay, I want to ask a couple people. It doesn't have to be every group, but somebody share with me, how did it go in your group? What did you like? What did you dislike? Obviously, one of the dislikes is going to be we only had 10 minutes to do it, and we couldn't get all the way through, and we felt rushed. So let's just go ahead and avoid that one. But what did you like? What did you dislike about doing this format? Yes?
I'll share one thing that happened in our group. It has to do with the storyline. You're telling stories. When we start off, we tell something that you're thankful for. Ron told his story of, I'm thankful for the life that I've lived, and I've been involved in Christianity my entire life, blah, blah, blah. Which segues right into John's story, John the Baptist's story of, from the womb, he was committed to God. This has been his life. This is his story. So it's just a way to tie that story together.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So last week we talked a little bit about the Beatitude evangelism. It doesn't have to be just the Beatitudes, right? But find what are those connections between somebody's life and what you're seeing in Scripture. So that's beautiful, thank you. One other thing too I'll mention is that every group I assigned a different text to. And so every group was doing a different text. So if you're going to comment about something about your text, you might just tell the rest of the room what your text was. You guys had the Matthew 3, the baptism of Jesus. Yeah. Okay, yeah, Chris.
So we had Isaiah 53, which, let me just go and say that this like here was like, if that's my first conversation with someone, it ain't happening, because that's some deep stuff, okay? Like, that's like level 10, okay? So that was kind of the like dislike, because it was really challenging, especially in such a time constraint, to try to summarize, wrap your head around and all that. But the good things about this part was, you know, because we all kind of already are believers, we already do have a little bit of knowledge, so we didn't have that hurdle to kind of overcome. But then also, it did give us a lot of, like, the questions about what does this tell us about Jesus? What does this tell about us? There's so many different conclusions that we drew from it, just because we all see things a little bit differently, and there's so many of us. And so it's like, the passage isn't just one single thing. It's not about, you know, hey, here, let me just give you one sentence to summarize. It's not really that way, right? Like, there's just so many different things you could talk about, and the awesomeness is like the application of, hey, how does this apply to me? Well, this could literally apply to like any single person, like every person on the planet can have an application to this kind of scripture because of how deep it is, but also how broad it is.
Yeah. And again, I'll go back. Perhaps I did this a disservice, but this does kind of follow a sequential order, right? So the Isaiah 53 passage is actually the passage in Discovery Bible Studies order that is directly before you go to the New Testament. So they hit this one prophetic passage in Isaiah 53, and then the next week it's the birth of Jesus. And so like they're making it as obvious as they can. Hey, we're talking about Jesus, right? And so they're trying to kind of set you up for that. So yeah, thank you. Anybody else this morning? Can I pick on our Leviticus crew? I tasked our youth group kids with Leviticus. Was it worthwhile to read that passage? Was it difficult? What did you think? Yes. It's very repetitive. Yes. Yeah. So the passage that they had was the instructions on how to give a sin offering in Leviticus chapter 4. And so it is, those passages are very repetitive, but it is interesting because you're talking about sin and how do you deal with sin. And so I imagine even in a setting like this, you could even gain something from, I hate to say it, but we struggle to gain something from the book of Leviticus. Let's be honest, right? But maybe in this format, maybe you could gain something from the book of Leviticus, even though it is very repetitive. Thank you guys for taking that on. It wasn't intentional. I wasn't trying to pick on you. I was just going in order, and y'all were the next group. Okay, the bell just rang, and so here's what I want to do to kind of close this out today, is I want to encourage you to think about who could I do this with, right? We've kind of been, I hope you've kind of heard me talking a little bit about that throughout the course of this study is, okay, who can I enter into a spiritual conversation with? Who is a person of peace that I can identify and spend some time with and be intentional towards? Is there anybody that you already know or that you can see in your life that they might be ready to take this next step and go a little bit deeper, beyond just a spiritual conversation, into something that is more specifically Christian? And think about who might that be, and how would you put this into practice with them? What was the conversation, what would be the conversation you would have with them to say, hey, do you want to try this? I'm going to start this little Bible study, and I'm just curious to know if you'd be interested in, and you don't have to be a Christian, but I just want to know what you think. How would you have that conversation with that person, whoever it is? So I want to encourage you to think about that, and if there is somebody, I want to encourage you also to give it a shot and see what happens. There might be somebody, but they might not be ready yet, right? So kind of follow those first steps that we talked about, and if you've got other insight and wisdom on how to kind of walk that journey, do that as well. But if there's somebody that you already know is maybe ready for this, I want to encourage you to think about that. Next week, I want to talk about asking good questions. So kind of going to your comment earlier, because I think that in a setting like this, whether you're in a spiritual conversation, whether you're in a Bible study, I think asking good questions is a really vital skill for evangelism today. Rather than preaching at somebody, we need to learn how to ask questions and have people kind of stop and think for a second. And so that's what we're going to talk about next week. I look forward to that. And if there's nothing else, then I'm going to dismiss us. Last chance for a comment. Yes?
If y'all are looking for a very gentle opening into this, please come to moms and preschoolers. We need you if you're 25 or 30, and we also need you if you're 10 years older than that as an interim mom. We have 55 women, and right now there's only maybe 5 people that are from this church that are kind of doing this, so we need people.
Yeah, perfect. What a great opportunity. Fridays, once a month, is that correct?
Yes.
First Friday of the month?
First Friday of the month.
So if you've got that, it's MOPS, so mothers of preschoolers, and Moms Next, which is mothers of elementary age kids. So if you're interested in that, great opportunity. Thank you, Christy. And I'll dismiss us, and we'll see you next week. Yes, Gear Up tomorrow, work day, and Gear Up, the event itself is on Friday. So please show up.